Hello everyone, welcome to the channel and I hope everyone is doing good. So in today's video, we are going to talk about the MCP interview question. So nowadays what I'm seeing is like AI system, the interview around the AI system is not just about the RAG or the multi-agent, it's also about the MCP. Because now the AI system or AI application not just uh, is used to create the chatbot system or not just used for an internal RAG system getting retrieval from the external source of data and using LLM for generating the answers, but now the AI system is being used to connect to the external systems like external services. For example, your AI application will connect to the Snowflake database and get some output from there, get some status from there. It can connect to or call some API and perform some action, and then it will return back with the answer, and then your main AI application will move from there. So the how we design now the AI system or the application of the AI system has changed, and so now MCP has become an integral part of the AI interview questions. So we are going to discuss MCP. We are going to discuss, I think, almost everything about the MCP interview question. For the understanding of MCP, having the fundamentals of MCP, I have already discussed in our previous video. In my previous video, you can go and check it. And guys, if you have not subscribed to our channel, then do subscribe to our channel and do share this video and channel to your friends or colleague who want to become a data engineer or who are already a data engineer and want to move to a GenAI field. So we'll start with the first set of questions. So the first question generally, the generally people will ask is about the introduction of MCP. So these both question like what is MCP and why was MCP introduced? This can be clubbed together. This can be asked directly or indirectly in multiple ways. But the thing is, they are going to understand what do you understand by MCP. So whenever you get this kind of question, and if you are a higher experienced person, then just don't start with the definition of MCP. Get into the problem statement. First, you can say that initially there was the problem statement. The problem statement was like when the AI system want to connect to an external device. For example, if AI system wants to connect to GitHub, then you have to write a connector, a program which will connect to the GitHub. Now, if the AI system wants to connect the same AI system, if it wants to connect to the Snowflake, then you have to write a database connector, a Snowflake connector for that in a Python program. So similarly, for each of the external connection or external tools which the AI system need, we have to write our custom Python program, and that was creating a problem to maintain these many connection. And then this cannot be reused in your any other AI application in your same organization. So there must be some protocol. There must be something common, unified way by which you can connect to the external device without worrying about the connecting services or without worrying about writing the custom program to get connected to the external the devices or external tools. And for that, MCP has come. MCP, it creates a server in which all the connection logic are clubbed together. And with the help of MCP server, you can connect to any of the external devices which are being mentioned in that MCP server. You can create your own MCP server. Your organization can create your own MCP server or the product, like for example, GitHub or the Google services. So they have their own MCP server. So you can use their MCP server. In case if you're creating the MCP server for your internal organization purpose, then that MCP server can be reused in multiple AI application in the same organization. So you have to say this kind of answer so that the internal will understand that you understand the whole purpose of the problem statement and you understand what MCP brings to have the solution for this problem. I hope you will be able to understand this. If you want more detail to it, go to a previous video. You will get more into why MCP and what is MCP. Now I'll move to the second set of questions. The second set of question is regarding the MCP architecture. So they will ask you to explain the MCP architecture because this is very important. Like if you understand MCP as a fundamental, then you would be able to explain the MCP architecture. And when you explain the MCP architecture, keep in mind that you have to explain them where the LLM lies. I've seen multiple people, they explain MCP architecture, they know MCP architecture, but they are not able to explain that where the LLM will be in this whole picture and what's the use of LLM in this full picture. Okay. MCP doesn't give you the answer or doesn't create the answer. It gives you the information. And LLM with your query and the MCP combined use its intelligence to create the final output. We'll see it now. So while creating the explaining the MCP architecture, you can say that user is using an AI system. That AI assistant has the LLM inside it. And when you ask any queries, like for example, you want to get some table data from Snowflake, so you ask any similar kind of queries, then LLM decide that it needs to connect to Snowflake, or LLM decide it needs to connect to Oracle or something, depending on the user query. And that line, like I need Snowflake, it goes to MCP client. That MCP client call the MCP server, and MCP server goes and connect to the database of the Snowflake. Like if in your MCP server there is a connector to the Snowflake, it will go to the Snowflake, get the result output, and that output is given to the LLM again, so that LLM can form the answer at the end. Okay, so who decides that which of the tool to call? LLM decide. And who help us to connect to the tool? MCP server help us to connect to the tool. Who connect to the MCP server? LLM doesn't connect to the MCP server. LLM through MCP client connects to the MCP server. Fine. LLM just tell the MCP client that what it needs, and depending on that, MCP client gives pass that message to the server, and that MCP server connect to that particular tools. Fine. So this is the complete architecture of MCP. Now you can see that there are a few important components. Like whenever you explain any architecture, like if you are going to explain Spark architecture, LLM architecture, or MCP architecture, the first thing is you have to explain the full flow. So now we have gone through the full flow. Then you have to go to the component. What is MCP client? What is MCP server? So what is MCP client? You can say that MCP client is the part of your AI application. Okay, it can be tool also, it can be your VS code also, it can be a simple application also. MCP client, any system which connects to the MCP server can be a MCP client. Fine. So what is the responsibility of it? Now we have seen that it sends the request to the MCP server. It discover available tools. So it has all the information that what all tools MCP server has. For example, MCP server don't have the Snowflake tool, then this I need Snowflake request will not go to MCP server. Then it maintains the session. Like now, when you have asked the information about the Snowflake, that session is to be continued, so that when the output comes from the MCP server, it can go back to LLM in the same session. Fine. And it receives response, means where it will receive response, it will receive response from the MCP server. So this is MCP client. It is the part of your AI application. Then what is MCP server? MCP server is a server, or a kind of a package, a kind of Python package, program package, which has all the generic connecting mechanism to all the tools which are available. You may write your own custom MCP server, which will be having a connector to only Snowflake, only files, or you can have your MCP server, which can have the connector to all the things which is written here. So MCP server is something which removes all that custom Python program which we need to write to connect to each of the external tool. Like the starting of the video, I have mentioned that earlier which we have to write the custom Python program to connect to all the external tools. Now, if I combine all the connector logic and make it generic and put it in an MCP server, put it in some package or somewhere, that we can call it an MCP server. Fine. Now, if you have another AI application like AI assistant 2, then you can also reuse MCP server at the other AI application also. Now you don't have to write an individual custom Python program. I hope you understand the flow. You will be able to explain it in your own terms. So just keep in mind, while explaining any architecture flow, explain the full flow of the system, then get into the component. If they want more into it, then you can go into the security. You can go to some of the you can use your experience to use your data into it. Some of the real-time use case, you can Google it and find it. Be prepared for this MCP architecture. This will be asked to any number of years of experience. Okay. Now we'll move to another set of questions. Now the other important question is, what are the responsibilities of an MCP client? So while explaining the MCP architecture, if you would have explained MCP client in detail, then the question or the interview will not go The interview will not ask about the MCP client in more detail. But if it doesn't happen, then the other question can be like, what is the use of MCP client and what all action MCP client performs? So you have to mention in a structured way. Like it helps in tool discovery. For example, if you write the command as list tool, so you should, like, before calling any tool or before using AI application to call any tool, you want to see what all tools are available. So it will give you the output read file, that it can read the file, it can write the file, it can search, it can do execute SQL by connecting to any of the database. So you can list the tool, you can list or look into the resource dictionary. Like in if you would have seen my previous video, just the previous to this, so I've explained that in MCP client you can keep the knowledge base also. Like if you're using an internal or creating your own internal MCP client, MCP server, in that case, or if you're creating your own MCP server, in that case you can also keep the policies document. If you're working in any insurance and banking sector, then the documents will be very specific, and that can be kept in this MCP server, which will be used with the MCP client to look into what all resource dictionary it has. And the answer can be matched to that dictionary. Like when you get the answer from, for example, any of the database, that can be clubbed to this dictionary knowledge and can be used as a final output. Or this dictionary can also be used as putting the guardrails when LLM has to answer after getting the answer from the few of the pointers from the MCP server. The other thing is prompt discovery. There are few prompts we can directly save into the MCP client, like summarization or analysis kind of some prompt, or some such kind of prompt which is more used or frequently used, that can be saved in a prompt dictionary, and that can be seen as a prompt discovery. The other important thing is session management, like as I've shown in the previous video, previous questions, that when the MCP client connects to the MCP server, getting the answer from the external tools, then there need to be one session should be maintained. So session management work is also done by MCP client. Now we'll see what are the responsibilities of an MCP server. So now we'll look into responsibilities of MCP server. MCP server is very integral part of your MCP architecture. So this you have to be very clear in this fundamental before answering this question. So MCP server, first of all, it has the connectivity with the tool. So if it will have the connectivity with the tool, then it should have the authentication process. It should also handle the authentication. Like if you have asked the request to connect to Snowflake, then MCP server should know how it should authenticate this request to connect to the Snowflake. So it handles authentication. The second thing is it exposes the tool. Like for example, you have written in MCP server the logic to get connect to GitHub, Snowflake, Slack. So all the tools which are available, it is getting exposed here. And the same kind of information can be discovered with the help of MCP client, like what all tools are available. It execute tool, obviously, because MCP server gets connected to the external tool. Obviously, it gets execute tools. Other thing is important is validate inputs. Like if you're going to connect to some of the API, and that API need employee ID as an input, but your LLM or your MCP client has passed employee name, so that is a wrong input that to that API. So in that case, MCP server validates it, and it will return that this is a wrong parameter, or any kind of custom information it can be returned. It return the structured response. For example, if you ask some detail of the table, then it will create an output. It will get the output from the Snowflake or from some API, and that output is passed to the MCP client in a structured way, normally in a JSON format, key value pair. Right. So these are the responsibilities of the MCP server. Now the other question is, what are MCP tools? So generally, see, tools are the external tools systems which is getting connected to the MCP server. But internally, how it understand with the help of a function. Like tools are executable functions, like internally inside the MCP. Like search underscore employee is one of the tool, create ticket another tool, run query another tool, send email another tool. So your MCP server may connect to the external devices, but it doesn't mean that you will perform all kind of information from an external devices. unless until that tool capability is created in a way of a function. For example, you have a run query in a Snowflake function created, then that you can perform the run query, but you cannot edit any table because that function or that tool has not been created. So these are the tools and these are the executable functions. Now, for example, if I ask the AI application, source today's sale. So LLM understand that I'm asking for some sales, and for that, your AI system needs to get connected to some database, and that from that database it has to extract the sales. So it calls execute SQL. It's not there in this tool, so it's called execute SQL, and then database returns some answer like 120 orders or revenue. Then the answer gets back to LLM, and then LLM explain this answer in a form of natural language, in a form of a better language. Now other question is, what are MCP resources? So you can, this is an optional, you can have the MCP resources, means some manual, some policies, some PDFs, some log files can be kept as a MCP resources. So that sometime what happen, like for like you have an AI application, and every time you don't want your AI application to get into the external system, interact with the external system and get the output. Maybe you have your own internal knowledge base. For example, in case of RAG, you have your own internal information, and that is retrieved to give you the answer. It doesn't go outside of the internet or outside of your system to find the answer. Similarly, if you have multi-agent system in which you want your system to think over, like if it really requires to get into the external tools, or is there the answer is already there in some of the repository, and it can look into the answer from the repository. So there this MCP resource come into handy. You can keep Word documents, CSV format, any kind of files, and when user asks, for example, summarize employee handbook, so LLM reads it and it understands that this can be fetched from the resources. So it will go into the resources like employee handbook.pdf. Like if you're working in some banking, then it can be something related to banking policies. And if you have that banking policy.pdf, it will look into it. It can be PDF, CSV, any file format, or you can look at the documentation, which all file format it supports now, and then it will look into that particular files and give you the output. And in this case, you are integrating your AI application to the MCP server, but it is not going to any external tool to interact. It can do the work of the AI by looking into the local resources which we have assigned into the MCP. Generally, these resources are in the MCP client side. So resources in the MCP client. So and as when we were discussing about the MCP client, you can also from the MCP client you can fire the command to look into what all MCP resources are already present in the MCP client. Fine. Now we'll see what are MCP prompts. So generally MCP prompts are reusable prompts. There are multiple kind of questions like summarization, analysis, just policing something. In that case, you don't want your AI application to every time create the prompt to call to your LLM and everything. So in that case, there are few in pre-built prompts. It's already been saved cache, not permanently it is saved, and that can be reused for solving your queries. One very interesting question is like, how does tool calling work in MCP? They have explained that it calls the tool, but how it internally it performs in the MCP. So now I'll explain this with an example. Like you have to create a Jira ticket. So what will you happen? The user uses the AI application. LLM means AI application. That AI application connects to the MCP client. Okay, that MCP client connects to the Jira MCP server. Jira MCP server means you have an MCP server which has the connectivity to the Jira. It creates the Jira ticket. Now your LLM is not doing anything. It has fired the question to the MCP server. The MCP server is creating. It has given the instruction to your Jira, and it's creating the ticket with the help of ticket API. It's creating the ticket. When ticket is created, the answer is given back to the LLM, and LLM form the answer like this particular ticket number has been created, and it is given to the user. Now the other question is how this MCP communication flow. It's a similar kind of question, like for example, if you're explaining the MCP architecture, you would have explained this in the MCP architecture. or in the MCP server or client question. But the answer question can come in different form. Like if they ask you about to explain the MCP communication flow, then you can just take an example for this kind of question. Just like tool calling, any flow, explain this process. Always take an example and then try to explain it. So now I've taken an example, like I asked the like user asked the AI application the Snowflake warehouse cost. So LLM identifies which tool it has to call. It has to call get cost. So MCP client send this request to the server. Server validates the input. Like for getting the cost, you have to give the warehouse name as an input. Obviously, if you want the cost for warehouse, you should have to give the warehouse name. Or if you want all warehouse cost, then some other parameter need to be passed. So MCP validates. It also validates the authentication. Like this user AI application user have that access to the Snowflake thing. So that everything is done with the MCP server. It executes the query into MCP in the Snowflake. The server returns the JSON, as I mentioned in some part of this video. Like the output is returned as a just JSON format. It return the JSON format to the client, and it goes to the LLM, and that LLM converts that answer, the JSON answer, into an English. Because if you get an answer in a JSON format, that doesn't look good. So to make it in a better English format, that LLM converts into English format and gives you the answer. So the other important, I mean, very important question is how MCP server is different from API. Now here people get confused into this and they are not able to explain it properly. I'll explain it with a simple example. So first of all, there is a huge difference between the normal API call and the using MCP. So in API, generally what we do, we call an API like I want the detail of the this number of the employee. The output is written as a JSON, and then we start writing the code on getting the return type or return answer. But in MCP, it is designed for AI. It's not designed for developer. Means MCP cater the answer, or it caters the request for an AI application, not for a user. But a normal API gets the input from the user. So eventually MCP also gets the input from the user, but MCP is responsible to give the answer to the AI application. Instead of hard coding, like you want this API or you hit this API, MCP, we give that parameter to the MCP, and MCP decide which API to call. So the AI discover the tool, but when we are using normal API, then we have to discover that API tool, a tool which have that API exposed. So there's a huge difference between the API and the MCP what we're going to use. You can like for the scaling purpose also, if tomorrow you want to add another API call, so you have to write that code. Or if you have that function, then you have to call that function. But in MCP, just if you add that new API call in MCP, then wherever AI application in your organization, the same MCP server is being used, so it can be used, or it can be reused into multiple places. Okay, so there's a big difference between the MCP and the API. The other question related to API, like is MCP replacing REST API? No, it's not going to do that. It's actually making the standard way, or a common protocol to call the APIs or the REST API. So now you can see that MCP sits on top of REST API, and there is an application. Earlier, what used to happen, there was no MCP. The developer was sitting here and writing the code calling the REST API. But now the developer thing has been removed by this AI and MCP. I hope you understand this. We have discussed in the previous question also. Now we'll move to, because I have more questions to cover. So we'll move to another question. So the other question is, can MCP, or does MCP remove the need for SDK? These are the software development kit. First, you understand what is SDK. Like Snowflake has their own software development kit, AWS has their own. So what it means, with the help of SDK, you can connect to the Snowflake API. You can call the Snowflake API, do the work in the Snowflake with the help of the program. The same thing you can do with the GitHub or Slack, but you have to write a custom Python program to connect to this. Yes, MCP removes it. What it does, like when you're using MCP in an AI application, so you're not worried about this SDK. All this headache has been taken care in MCP server. So MCP server has taken all this care, and it has created, used this SDK or by other means, mostly by the SDK mean, it has created connection to the external tools like these all Snowflake, Slack, GitHub tool. So developer, from the point of developer, yes, there is no need for SDK for us. But from a technology point of view, yes, SDK is still needed, but developer is not going to use it directly. MCP server is going to use it directly. So I have, I think, five, six set of questions more. So I'll cover it a bit fast. Like how does MCP improve security? So when we saw the architecture and in multiple of the questions, we have seen that MCP server connects to the external tool. So MCP server takes care of validation of the input parameter, and it also takes care of the authentication. So the tool connecting mechanism, the authentication mechanism is not handled by any LLM. It's not given to any LLM. Still, that mechanism is controlled by the program which developer write. Like developer has created MCP server. So MCP server has the capability to, for the security purpose, like validating the input, or it also looks into any request which AI comes to call the external tool through MCP server. Then MCP server looks into the authentication of that request. The other question is, how does MCP compare with function calling? So MCP calling the tool and function calling is different, because function calling logic has to be written to your each application. It cannot be a part of, it can be a part of common utility, but generally it is very much combined with your application. Then the second thing is, for each of the work, you have to write your different function call. And so in MCP, we don't write the function call for each of the tool. That is taken care itself by the MCP server. But from a perspective of AI application user, you don't need, or AI application developer, you don't need to write function for each of the activity. We have seen multiple times. So MCP is different, and the function calling is different. Obviously, MCP is far way back. So we are going to look into the last question. So what transport protocol does MCP support? I don't think this question will be in the interview. Like, this is not going to be a deciding question for your getting passed in the interview or rejecting in the interview. But at least someone who has a bit of admin experience or a senior level of architect should have this answer in handy. So the answer is, like, it supports few of the protocols like STDO, commonly used for the local tools. For example, if you have a cloud desktop and you are connecting to MCP file system, MCP server, and that the file system of the MCP server, then STDIO is used. So that can be used with the GitHub Copilot also. That can be used in the case of VS Code also. I think it's available. Yes, in the Chrome or in this PyCharm also. It can be used. The other is HTTP when you are communicating to the remote MCP server, like that MCP server is not in your local system, it's somewhere else. Like if you're using any product MCP server, for example, you're going to use Google MCP server, Snowflake MCP server. I don't remember, like Snowflake has their own an MCP server. But if you're using any product MCP server, then with the help of HTTP, will connect to the remote MCP server. And then, yes, I've taken the example of Snowflake. So you can connect to the Snowflake from, right? So these are few of the interview questions. Like, I think it will cover almost everything in your MCP things. Now, if you're a higher experience, try to combine this with your existing project. Try to do some use cases. You can Google some real or production ready use cases, and then you can practice it. In all these questions, if you have any doubt, please post the question in the comment. If you have any suggestion, please that also in the comment. You want to connect with me, you can connect through LinkedIn. You can mail me, and like you can connect to LinkedIn, but before mailing you can just put it in the comment, so that everyone can be benefited with the answer which anyone in the community provides, or I provides the answer. I'll come with some other videos some other time. Till then, happy learning and goodbye.